Do you have that camera back there? You can look at all our computer monitors.
That's a great idea.
I've been on topic the entire time. Feel free to zoom.
But after that.
Do you have the same thing?
No.
I had a student once, who was just go far in class while looking at big screen. Well, really, I'm not that funny, so
I don't want
you're up to no good.
What do you call it?
Okay, so we'll get a teeny bit in the weeds here, and we'll talk about some of the sort of practices of lobbying and how they work, or maybe they do or don't work. So we'll talk about strategy and whether it's a better idea to lobby on your own, or why people might join a coalition to lobby. So I'll just start with one example, drug reimportation. What is drug reimportation? Anybody know what the story is?
Well, it's like you buy drugs from Canada for cheaper and bring them back here.
Right. Why are drugs cheaper in Canada? We have this thing called the FDA. And the FDA takes a long time to approve drugs. And and part of that very rigorous process means that the drug maker is protected from competition for an extended period of time. So they get to charge more money because their argument is, listen, we spent a lot of money coming up with this drug and going through this process. We need to recoup that investment. So you can get a drug here for, sort of $200 a pill, then in Canada might cost you $10 a pill, right? So this has actually been an issue for a long time. In 2000, Senators Dorgan and Snow started a campaign to get drug reimportation, and multiple coalitions organized in support of this bill, actually coming to fruition. So you have, who would like this idea?
But isn't the cost of development and research already included in the patents of the medication? Why is it different in Canada or in the US?
Well, the cost, so I spent $1 billion on making the drug, and then I'm going to plan on selling it for a really long time for a really lot of money, and that's where I'm recouping.
Yeah, but that's covered by the patents. Don't you apply for a patent that you researched and you came up with this solution, so you get 5 years of selling it by yourself?
Right.
Doesn't that apply to Canada as well?
No.
No?
Right. That's the rub. So multiple coalitions organized in support. Who would like this idea? Drug reimportation?
AARP.
Art would like it because why? Bunch of drug-taking old people. Okay, Art likes it. Who else? I think you might have said it.
Consumers?
Pro-consumer, right? Pro-consumer's gonna like it. Who else is gonna like it? State and local government likes it because they can buy drugs cheaper for their drug plans, right? Anybody else? How about Canadian pharma?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
More customers.
Canadian, so when I say pharma, I mean the pharmaceutical lobby, right? Canadian pharma will like this a lot. All right, so that's a lot of people. That's a lot of firepower there. And so our pharma has to respond to that. And you can see this is pharma right there. 2000, look at that, starts going up, up, up in terms of lobbying dollars. And then their strategy, starting in 2006, do you see that next hiccup? Their strategy was to start funding only Republicans who were going to protect them from reimportation. So their strategy was, sort of to target people who were going to keep this thing off the table. So then 2008, we have President Obama. How does he feel about reimportation? Take a wild guess. He's for it. He's for it because poor people, cheap drugs, that all sounds good, right? Okay. However, he also wants the Affordable Care Act. What does he need to get the Affordable Care Act passed?
He needs their support.
Whose? He needs pharma. So he gives up on drug reimportation. He trades, basically, to get pharma to the table. So, what does this tell you? What does this story tell you, if anything?
Influence is very important.
Okay? Tells you a lot of stuff. I'm not looking for specific. What does it tell you? What are your thoughts?
There's no perfect solution.
There's no perfect solution. So in 2000, when we started this reimportation, sort of coalition, blah, 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 could we have known what was going to happen in 2008 with American Affordable Care Act? There's no way you could have known that. Would you have invested the money anyway? If you were pro-reimportation, would you have invested the money anyway?
You get a seat at the table.
You have to.
Yeah.
You can't just walk away. And here's the interesting thing. It didn't die. Just because Affordable Care Act, there was no drug reimportation ACA, didn't go away. People kept pushing. And so now Maine's got drug reimportation. Klobuchar in Minnesota has just introduced a bill. So these things don't die, and they require a really sustained effort. So getting to the coalition part of it, you might sort of, if you're one of those players, say you're ARB, it might be a good idea to be part of a coalition because you need to, sort of pool your resources because this is going to be a long haul. So you can see where the advantage of working in coalition, that might make sense. So here's another story. How many know the story? Well, you're not going to know the whole story of the death tax. Do you know what the death tax is?
The estate tax.
And what is the estate tax?
My dad's job.
It's on inheritance, right?
Yeah, it's a tax that you pay on inheritance, right? So in 1987, a group of wealthy families hired a lobbyist. And their goal was to get the estate tax repealed. A bill was introduced, this was 1987, a bill was introduced in 1999. That's how long it took them even to get to that point. Okay, because other stuff happens. The politics aren't right or whatever, right? So then, right around then, actually, you get the switch to estate tax from death tax. You start getting a little bit more momentum. And they also realized that they needed to broaden their appeal. Because at the time, the idea was like, we're going to let rich people off the hook, right? So what did they do? Who did they bring in? Just throw something out. Who might they bring in that might work to their advantage?
The middle class?
Lobbyists.
Yeah, no, let's think about that for a second. So what's the image? What's the image that we currently have? Really wealthy people. Okay, so how do we change that image?
Change your name.
Bring in a struggling mom or
Okay,
someone who will put like a better face to
a family farm. Now that's an image, right? What are you gonna mess with a family farm?
There aren't
So,
many, like, family farms.
small
Like
business.
5 of them.
Somebody, the story, right, no, I mean, the reality didn't, so the story gets expanded so that, you know, this guy, he started a hardware store and he made good and he worked 12 hours a day and now he wants to leave something to his kids. It's a new story now. So this gets some momentum. So in I want to say it was 2000. They actually got a change in the tax code, and the tax code now says, I think it still says, that the first $5 million of inheritance is exempted from the estate tax. After that, you got to pay up. Okay? How does this coalition feel about that?
Not great.
Why not?
Well, the people who started it had way more than $5 million.
So the people who started this thing are like hundreds of millionaires, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. Exempting the first 5 million, please. So interestingly, it actually did benefit, you know, sort of the smaller fry that they brought in, but it didn't benefit them at all. So for me that's kind of interesting. Oh, okay. So why do you think it's interesting? I think it's interesting. Why do you think it's interesting?
Well, if you assume that people who are rich are getting what they want in politics, this is an example of them not getting what they want in politics.
Great. Yeah.
Public opinion actually having influence on policy in the end.
Yeah. There are limits, right, to what they can get away with. What else? In terms of lobbying strategy, the coalition kind of got away from them. You know? That's kind of interesting. And then, you know, is it Gillen's book that talked a little bit about framing and how it doesn't matter as much as one might think? I don't know about that. Because I think that the momentum here, or a big part of it, was estate tax to death tax. But Gillen specifically says, I think it was Gillen, looks at climate change and death tax and says it didn't make that much of a difference in public opinion. But,
Well, does he say public opinion, or does he say the end result?
public opinion.
Okay.
So maybe that's not a good measure,
Right.
you know, sort of momentum and of I don't know what. I think that's a great example too of, you know, this stuff is really hard to parse sometimes. Okay, so another sort of less exciting example. So I wrote this for a chapter in a book a couple years ago now. So this is 1998, Higher Education Act reauthorization. And at the time, I was still connected. Still working in Congress? I can't remember this. Anyway, just after I was working in Congress. And so you have Hispanic serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, and American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And these are sort of the associations that represent these kinds of schools, right? Historically black colleges and universities are designated in the Higher Education Act as, these are the, I can't remember how many schools it is, let's call it 12, that's not the right number, but these schools will always get dollars, right? And they're named and that's them. Hispanic serving institutions are more recent, and they are definitional. So if a college gets enrollment of more than 40% Hispanic, again, I'm wildly guessing on the number, then they're Hispanic serving institutions, and they can get money from this pot. Okay, so the idea is to help these groups that have been underrepresented in higher education and support these institutions. That all sounds great. What's the problem? Education Act reauthorization, they're fighting like cats and dogs, these three groups. Why might that be? You may not be able to answer this question. Why do you think they're fighting? They're competing for the same dollars, right? They're all a minority. They're competing for the same dollars. You have HBCUs who are written into the law, and then there's these Johnny-come-latelys, these Hispanics, right? And now it's really complicated because you have HBCUs who are serving 40 or 50% Hispanic, right? So what is that? You know, like what do you do with that? And then, sort of the populations of these schools are really, really varied and changing. But they're fighting over this piece of pie, and they all have very different perspectives on who should get how much. Like, should they actually be good colleges and universities? Should they actually be able to have to show some sort of, outcomes? So, shortly after, I'll finish the story. So, shortly after that reauthorization, the 98, in 99, the Alliance for Minority Serving Institutions was formed, and it was essentially these three groups that came together and they made happy, right? What the heck? How did that happen? So there are a lot of reasons the literature talks about that you might see a coalition form, something like this. So you might see if you have a coalition might magnify your power, right? Because all of a sudden there's a sort of a bigger entity. You're not just these tiny little things running around. There's something that people can sort of focus on, right? You might also not want to join because you're competing with these people, right? So why would you want to join together? Why might a weak organization or a new organization join in a coalition?
So they can send their message or reach their interests?
Sure, it expands their power, right?
Yeah.
They're using the resources of other more established organizations.
So
But why might they not want to join?
they think the interests won't be driven to their benefit?
They might not
So-
benefit because they're not strong enough, right? Or they might worry about their identity. They might worry that they'd get co-opted,
Yeah.
right? Like AHEC. AHEC is this tiny little American Indian higher education. It's tiny. So does it make sense for them to join with the other two really much bigger players? Or are they better off on their own? That's a calculation that they have to think about before they join in that coalition. So Hula says there are these three reasons for joining a coalition. Well, what might be a strategic reason to join a coalition? It really is what it said, like strategic. Like, you get what you want. You would actually accomplish the goal of the coalition. You would get the death tax. That is a strategic, decision to join the coalition. What is selective benefits? We're going to talk about more when we get into the theory. What is a selective benefit? You may not think you're going to accomplish your big, fancy goal, but being part of the coalition, you might get some benefit out of that. Something that's not strategic, something that's not sort of ultimately what you want, but it gets you, like maybe you get to be on their mailing list, or maybe you get access to new funding sources, or maybe there's, sort of other benefits that you get from being part of this coalition. Symbolic?
Like you said, even though you don't get what you want, you're making a big stand and it's more powerful within a group.
Yeah, and that helps you all kinds of ways. Remember, Hispanic serving institutions, the association gets paid by the Hispanic serving institutions. They gotta look like they're doing something. So when they go in this coalition, they're like, oh wow, look, they're doing stuff. This is great.
They joined a coalition.
They joined a coalition. They're out there. Okay, Hojnacki looks at these variables, and let's use the gun lobby as an example. So the context is important. What's the nature of the policy or the issue? Is it highly contested? Is it something that, you know, people don't really care about, or something that really there's a lot of divided opinion on? And in that case, maybe, you know, if it's really contested, maybe, you know, a coalition to sort of collect your, you know, sort of all of these different organizations together would be a good idea. Allies, who's in the coalition? So in this case, you're pro-gun, you're some little, I don't know, in Ohio or something, and you're thinking you want to join this coalition. Who's already in the coalition, and why does that matter?
Smith and Wesson.
Gun manufacturer.
Okay. The NRA? Who's the big boy on the block? Right? Is this a coalition of these little podunk kooky things, or is this a coalition of, no, seriously, we own this thing? And that's who I want to be in a coalition with, right? So you got to think about the allies. Autonomy, do you worry about losing your autonomy if you join this coalition? So if you're the AHEC, you know, sort of, is that a problem? And then character. Are you really and truly deep down pro-gun, which we'll talk about, you know, sort of character a little bit more. You know, are you okay with being in coalition with the NRA or whoever? So in the minority serving institution case, so Wojnacki says if you've got this strong organized opposition, you're more likely to join a coalition. But in this case, they were each other's opposition. So that's kind of unusual that they, you know, they sort of put down their swords or whatever and came together. So what do you think? Any thoughts on why that might be? Think about what they're trying to accomplish, and
Well, if they can lobby for more money and expand the pie, then everyone wins out in the end.
be a little open-minded, right? It's not the pie, this is your piece, and you're fighting over this. What if your piece was like this or like this, right? And if you are working in coalition, that's a whole different ballgame. So why does it make it a different ballgame? Why does it maybe potentially expand the piece of pie?
I mean, to me, it's economies of scale and how effective you can be with your resources.
Okay.
So if everyone needs to fight their own battles,
Yeah.
you can be more easily conquered and divided than if you come together. And then when it comes time to split up that larger piece of the pie, at least you have something in common with each other.
Yep.
It's a bit less combative of them.
That's definitely true.
Also, if you just make the whole pie bigger, even if you keep the same proportional slices, you get more.
Sure. Think about this case in particular, and think about what they need to do and who they need to make happy and how that's going to work and why, by joining together, they get a bigger piece of pie. Just talk for 2 minutes in your smaller groups. Think strategically about this.
Yeah.